Now that we've, the whole country has had like a minute a day to kind of let Super Tuesday sit and see what happened, how things really shook out here. I want to talk with John Thomas. He is a Republican strategist and host of the podcast, The Thomas Guy. John, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great.
Glad you're here. So let me start here. Republican strategists, let's talk about that for a second. Because the 2016 election threw everything up in the air. This one's all crazy again. So many strategists, first of all, the pundits way off from 2016. The pollsters are way off. So many strategists are way off. And you see some moves that different campaigns are making. You're like, what are you guys thinking? So how should strategists be thinking today that maybe is different than one would have in the past?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, you're totally right. In 2016, a lot of the strategists and punditry class got it totally wrong. Partially, it's because a lot of them, with the exception of me, of course, a lot of them that are on TV haven't touched a race in 20 years. So, Facebook, the internet didn't even exist when they were running campaigns, and now they're trying to opine on the impact of social media on races. So that's one disconnect. But what can we take away from what's going on right now? One is a word of caution using polling as destiny. We saw as of Saturday the momentum that Joe Biden enjoyed from his South Carolina win and the fast consolidation was the biggest swing, a whipsaw of momentum and moving in polling numbers that I've ever seen in my lifetime. So that is something you can't just say, well, polling said a week ago such and such was going to happen. It's just not the case. So you can't use that as a guide. The other is, while Joe Biden is the favorite right now, you can't completely rule out Bernie Sanders for a couple reasons, but the main one being that there's a human component to campaigns. And if Joe Biden were a steady player, that you knew that he would make no mistakes, no gaffes, that he would hit his marks, perhaps this would be a little more consistent race. But remember, Joe Biden is a terrible candidate if you really think about it. Let's talk about, until Saturday night, the guy was dead on arrival only because he crushed it in South Carolina, and the establishment is trying to steal this race from Bernie Sanders, so they consolidated around Joe. It has a dramatically different feeling to me than in 2008, when there was an excitement and enthusiasm, a true enthusiasm in the Democratic primary around Barack Obama. There isn't that with Joe Biden.
Go back to your first point about the polling. Can you give us a little more detail into that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm also a pollster. So this is one of the things we do for a living. So polling can be very, very deceptive, especially public polling, because we like to say, public pollsters, whether it's for media outlets, and yes, even Fox News gets it wrong, they don't have an incentive to get it right. They only have an incentive to put out numbers and talk about it, versus campaign internal polls that are oftentimes vilified as internal push polls. I will say, actually, it's an internal poll. We have to get it right. We're going to deploy capital and resources based upon that data. A CNN poll, it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. They'll just say those were old numbers. Then you add on top of it that there's methodological differences that swing wildly between pollsters. For instance, do you know that most of the time when they're referencing Gallup polls, which is a good polling company, do you know that doesn't use a likely voter model? So what that means is they use all registered voters, which is interesting for water cooler talk, but it may or may not have any indication of what or link to what actually is going to happen in an election. And the last thing I'll say is, we focus on these national polls, which again is really interesting, as perhaps we call it a leading indicator. But in reality, do you know that a national poll means bupkis? It's the state by state polls in those few key electoral states that are going to matter.
Slater Crusaders, thanks for watching The First on YouTube. If you want more, subscribe. We got plenty.